So next up, I'm excited about this. We've heard a few points of view this morning, but we're here and it's New Front Week. And New Fronts are all about content, because content still matters. And on our next panel, I'm very excited to dive into and see what things like attribution and viewability means from a content provider's point of view. To lead that discussion is Larry Allen. Larry is the SVP of Supply for Xaxis in the Americas. So please welcome Larry.
Thanks, Brian. All right, so I don't know about experts, but we're going to certainly give it our best this afternoon. So I'll introduce the panel. Marc Mallett, Director of Audience Sales at ESPN. Eric Meth, SVP of Programmatic Sales for Triad. Lisa Valentino, SVP of Sales, Conde Nast. And Rich Sutton, CRO of Reader's Digest. So we've got all sellers up here on the panel. We all are talking to clients every day, agencies every day, talking about our product, content that we are putting in front of consumers. Obviously, the topic is viewability and maximizing your content for viewability. So I guess the first question I have is for all of you, we'll go around. What's the hardest question you're asked in a meeting when it comes to viewability? You want to go first, Marc? He's like, oh.
The hardest question, I don't know if it's necessarily the hardest, but one of the challenges, actually, to give you a little background, I run the programmatic sales arm for ESPN. So a lot of my conversations are having to do with programmatic selling, audience-based buys, and things like that. And it's really using viewability as a currency right now with the different vendors that are out there and the certification that they've gone through with the MRC. We've run tests, and they come back with some nuanced differences, to say the least. So when we're talking about a currency, the currency of viewability, that comes into play because we have to clarify it.
I think for us, I mean, we're in a little bit of a different position as we represent, Triad represents retail publishers. So there's a lot of nuances between a traditional publishing environment and a retail publishing environment. John Donahoe of eBay or Doug McMillan of Walmart, they don't wake up every morning saying, how many ads can I sell on my site? That's what we worry about at Triad, among other brands that we work with. There's a variety of hard questions that come up, I think just because there's still a lot of education that has to happen on the buy side and within the industry in general. We get into things like measurability and some of the difficulties that exist in secure commerce environments versus the standard publishing environment. So I think it's just that level of education that we have to gauge when we go into those meetings, and then we can have a more productive conversation about how to best manage that dialogue going forward.
Probably the day after we did the Group M deal, every other agency around town asking for the same deal.
Mm-hmm.
So, hold on, better? Yes? Okay.
There we go.
So you guys heard that. Everybody wants that deal. I think it is the education thing, and that's why I bring that point up, is folks not really understanding what they're asking for, what they should be asking for. And, you know, while publishers have to create a point of view on what that standard is, like, you know, many agencies, our clients do as well. And everybody has a different response and a different answer to that. And I also think the measurement companies are all over the map as well. And I think that's really hard too, because we're being asked to work with, you know, call it 8 to 10 different vendors that track this stuff, that all come back with different definitions, different algorithms, and different metrics. So making sense of it all, I think, is, we're in that space. We've been in that space for the last 15 years if you've been in the digital business. Mm-hmm. Just same thing, different
topic.
Right.
Topic du jour.
I think the hard question right now is, how are you solving for viewability? And for a while my answer was, well, and I've finally come up with an answer, which is we're testing a number of solutions. And because that's actually the truth. We're testing, let's just serve the ad when the space is in the viewable part of the browser. That's not a perfect solution. We lose a lot of inventory if we went that way 100%. We're testing sticky units. That's not a great solution. It covers up content. So I don't think I don't have an answer today, but I can tell you that we're testing a lot of solutions.
So Marcus, he raises the point of accountability and responsibility. Clearly many buyers now are taking the stance where they only want to buy a viewable impression. And it feels like it just falls in the publisher's lap. So how do you combat that, or how do you expect a buyer to engage with you around the topic of viewability to come to a solution that can work today when there are still so many unanswered questions or challenges with respect to how your kind of current measurement is being deployed?
Well, I would go to what Lisa said about measurement. So the negotiation starts, and my first question is, okay, what are we going to use for mediation? If there's a discrepancy, who do we go to? Do we go to Moat? Who? And if the person on the other end of the phone doesn't have an answer to that question, then I know they haven't really thought about it a whole lot. So, yeah, it's measurement.
It also depends on what the KPI is. You have to start there because, if you're looking to create a very engaging environment and you're buying big, rich, high-impact units, well, the viewability on those actually isn't going to be very high. So it's not viewability for viewability's sake. What we're trying to do is weed out, the bad apples, if you will, and we also want to weed out the bad habits that we've likely all been, creating for years and years, which is just slap another ad on the page, just make the page longer. That's obviously, in our opinion at Conde, the reason why we took such a step forward, it wasn't because we said, oh, this is easy for us, our viewability scores are at 100%. No, it was that accountability is what's driving every redesign that we do at the company is now with that KPI, in mind. But it really has to start there because not everything that has low viewability scores will never be bought again. There are some really important exceptions or parameters to think about, I think, when we think viewability. So.
Yeah, I mean, that actually raises two great questions. And I'd like to, Marc, you have just gone through a major redesign at ESPN, and I know that I have to assume that viewability was a big piece of that conversation when you were going through the process. But how do you as a publisher kind of separate viewability and accountability for your buyer and the consumer experience that you're trying to build from a product standpoint for the end consumer?
Well, and it's a good point, you're right. The last redesign that we did was 9 years ago, and with regards to viewability, it's something that we're keeping in mind, but first and foremost, what ESPN does is keep the fan's experience in mind, and that's really the first filter that our user interface guys are running it through, the people in Bristol are running it through, is to make sure that it's going to be the best environment. And that plays into viewability, and the example I'll use is that now on our homepage we only have 2 display ad units. They're in the top loaded page themselves. It's an ever scroll environment, we don't have any more display. So it's just those first 2 that fire, and then that's it from a display perspective on the homepage.
So you're really trying to balance that kind of newsfeed feel for the consumer that it seems like all of the end users want, with the placement of the ads in a way that drive maximum viewability for the buyer. But there is some opportunity cost, potentially.
There is some opportunity cost in terms of inventory. I think was mentioned a little bit earlier. It's a balancing act, right? Because if it's just tons of inventory that you want, it's probably not going to be the best experience for an advertiser. It's not going to be the best for us in terms of monetization. So we'd rather get rid of that, give the user, give our fans back a better experience, and maybe focus on video, which is what we've done. So in the feed themselves, it's all click video, and that's also played into the design that we did.
Do we think that there's a better ad unit that could work in that type of an environment for both the consumer and the buyer that we wouldn't traditionally think of as a display ad or a pre-roll video?
You know, if we figure it out, I think it'll be a good thing. I'm not sure from an ad unit perspective. I think it's still thought of in terms of maybe it is something that looks a little bit more native, but I'm not sure.
So, I mean, Rich, you were talking about earlier, before we kind of came up here, that native opportunity as potentially the middle ground between the consumer experience and the buyer. Do you have thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, all the testing that I've done over the last few years is native works. It's got a really high response rate. It has really high recall scores. And because it's in line and it looks like the feed, users aren't, you know, what we see in focus groups is users are fine with it. They're not complaining about it. So I think that's, you know, another point for native.
Feel like the brands are leaning into that appropriately, given kind of this challenge that they're asking for high viewability, and then are they kind of meeting you halfway there? I mean, I don't know, Lisa, do you have thoughts here?
When you say brands,
Well, the client, the advertiser, you know, are they coming to you with assets that you just launched a native product, right, that seems to be going pretty well? Are they all coming to you with content? Or are you having to build that content for them to solve for this problem, I guess is the
yeah,
question.
I think it's both. I think we can, you know, location is just one piece. Context is as important. I mean, like these are age-old things that, you know, we constantly talk about. So yeah, I think we are doing lots of work in the branded content and native space, where, you know, both with clients as well as other media companies. So, you know, at our New Front yesterday, can't believe it was just yesterday, at our New Front yesterday, we talked about, you know, new media partnerships with folks like Warner Music and The Onion and others. And so we're creating content with lots of, you know, that relationship, I think, takes lots of different forms, but location's just one piece that contributes, I think, to overall performance.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that you actually have to create the context for the buyer in order to eliminate the viewability conversation? Meaning, if you are participating in that experience creation, does then viewability become a non-issue as part of the negotiation?
Well, I mean, from a video standpoint, the way we do a lot of our branded content deals is on a performance basis. So yes, viewability, it's irrelevant. It goes away. It's not part of the conversation. It's interesting. I don't know how many new fronts have taken place so far, right, this week, and it's all of next week. Have heard, I mean, God, there's like 10 words that have been overused by us and everybody in the market over the last 48 hours. Viewability hasn't been one of them. You know, premium, millennial, you know, native, it's like you were getting killed with these words, but it's table stakes. You know, it's just, and frankly, I think, Marc, from an inventory standpoint, it means you can take your pricing up. Because the reality is we've inflated this market. I know lots of folks in the room don't like hearing that, but we have created, what will happen is inventory and supply will shrink. That's not a bad thing. You know, that's a very good thing for great media brands, many of which are in this room. And, you know, so that whole dynamic and that whole equation will shift. You know, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
No, I completely agree. I think using viewability as the first measure of defense, if you will, to identify quality of an environment that you want to be in, I think is a great thing, to have a consistent metric to look at. So, Eric, I know you're in an environment which viewability is very challenging because the publishers you work with are very much focused on a very different metric, which is selling something.
Yep.
And that is their primary business. So when you're kind of talking to those companies, how do they think about viewability? What are the what's the pushback that you're hearing that, maybe keeps the number lower than you'd like to see it?
From our partner standpoint, our
Correct.
retailers. They're actually embracing it really well. Again, they're not re-engineering their sites. Their main goal is to sell stuff to people. We've been able to segment out inventory and create different value tiers within the inventory that we're putting out there. Surprisingly, we have a healthy amount of viewable inventory. Much like Reader's Digest, we're in constant testing phase. Everybody is right now. We're working with a handful of accredited vendors that are looking at numerous metrics. And I think that's part of what we're trying to both educate our partners with, we're trying to educate the buy side with, that it's not just that one end-all be-all metric, viewability. It might be a one benchmark, but I think there's a lot of myopic thinking on the buy side that has to be the first thing everyone looks at. It has to be a combination of different things. And the good vendors, the viewability vendors, are measuring a lot of different elements. They're measuring dwell time. They're measuring attention. All this has to go into it, in addition to the measurability element, to get that end result. Then you could start valuing that inventory properly. And to Lisa's point, below the fold inventory that's less viewable, we still sell a lot of it programmatically. So machines aren't turning their noses up at it just because that score is down. It's hitting a KPI that's working.
Yeah, I think performance is absolutely the second component, right? So if you're trying to balance viewability and performance, sometimes they're at odds depending on the KPI, but in some cases, your best performing unit is the least viewable unit. I remember talking to a publisher that effectively ran a listings business, and they had a unit at the very bottom of the page, and it was always tied to the context of those listings, and it was their highest performing unit for every advertiser in their endemic category, because you scrolled to the bottom of the page, you didn't find what you wanted, you clicked on the ad or went to that advertiser's website. So there is a place for it, and I think it comes back to the education. But the bigger question is billing, right? If you have a buyer who only wants to pay on the viewable number, all of your ads on your page could be 30%, and that's totally fine. How do you reconcile that in today's programmatic system? Anybody want to take that?
I mean, I think it comes down to setting expectations, right? Because then it becomes a math problem. So if you arrive at, say, 70%, and that's the agreed upon metric that the impressions that are going to be purchased through a programmatic channel are viewable, every week, every 2 weeks, you can take a look and measure against that, and then adjust the CPMs accordingly on an ongoing basis. But I think it's setting the expectations, and I think, and Lisa touched on it as well, I think that's a lot of it. A lot of us, the publishers, and the type of content that we're dealing with, we're not afraid of viewability, but there's a lot of things that need to be figured out just from a standards perspective.
So you're effectively backing out to a VCPM, and then there's a benchmark number that you and your buyer agree to, and so you're modifying that. However, I think the buyer is, in a programmatic world, paying on the actual number in 100% of the cases, regardless if it was in view or not. So there's still that feeling of waste, right? So how do you kind of get over that when I think a lot of people are coming to the table and saying, no, I will not pay at all?
I mean, then it comes down to the billing systems and working with the supply side platforms to figure out a way that if it is measured as non-viewable, then it doesn't get charged, it doesn't run through that entire process and gets removed from that, I guess, invoicing chain.
Yeah, but if you don't think about it as eCPM, you're going to drive yourself crazy, because you're just going to think about all those impressions that you didn't monetize. Well, I'd like to see the ball get thrown back on the other side and have you just serve to viewable impressions and kick back anything that's not viewable. Now, that's not 100%, I know, but boy, that'd take a lot of work off my shoulders.
Only pre-bid assessment was all in right now.
Yeah, I think that, well, I think it comes back to technology, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about it, right? The measurement capabilities, the different vendors. Each buyer may use a different vendor, so you're, again, being held to kind of do the work and do that heavy lifting to optimize viewability based on the buyer's technical choice. How quickly will it, or how long will it take, I guess, until we get to a place where you feel like you've got a system in place to easily optimize for viewability because everybody's kind of on the same page? It took us probably 3 years to get to an agreement on how to define an impression, and that was pretty basic, right? So this is a much more complicated issue that's rooted in consumer behavior and design and, you know, just the type of unit, right? So
I don't think there's a clear line in the sand on that. I don't think there's a drop dead date where we're going to be like, great, we figured out viewability. What's next? I think we're going to continue to iterate on this. I think we're just going to get the same way that we're working with Group M on a very high standard that you've set, that the industry is following. I don't think a lot of the industry or the buy side is putting as much thought around the reconciliation factor and everything that goes with it. I think Rich said earlier, you get a lot of blank stares when you start poking a little bit more about what they're really looking for, and then you can kind of gauge how deeply they've thought about this. So, yeah, I mean, invite me back in 6 months or a year, and maybe we'll have a better answer to that, but I don't think there's a definitive line right now on when that'll all be solved.
So do we think that the viewability challenge is harder or easier in video?
We don't run a whole lot of video, so I'll let my panel mates take that one.
You know, again, I go back to the different types of models for video that we're implementing, and on the performance side, obviously, it's a lot easier. You know, our bigger challenges, and maybe it is more from an inventory standpoint, is on the display side. And what we're doing, you know, and I think Group M pushed us in terms of, you know, they're working, I think, with a handful of partners. You guys are working with a handful of partners. And it forced us, I think, to take a position as well, evaluate those partners. You know, the Moat is now our strategic partner from an engagement standpoint, so across the spectrum of the things that they report on. And I think that just helps, whether it's video, whether it's display, and more to come, because we've got to be thinking mobile. We've got to be thinking, I mean, we're doubling down on things like over the top. So, you know, all of these pieces have implications. It's a lot easier to figure it out when you're working with one partner. You may get 10 others thrown at you from the community, but we're trying to lock in. The problem is you've got to be evaluating new technology, you know, in real time. So, but it is a lot easier to at least have a strategic partner at the table who understands our business and what we're trying to get done.
Well, I think the more people who are like you, who say, okay, Moat that's our strategic partner, that's our go-to, or at least our mediation if the advertiser is using somebody else, then that gets us a lot closer to the question you asked before, which is, how long is it going to take to solve this? I really think that the issue is not about should it be viewable or shouldn't it be viewable. The issue is, how do you measure it? And once everybody comes to agreement on that, then we'll figure it out. But right now, we're wasting an awful lot of time on, okay, well, who's going to measure it?
You know, Moat, I don't know if anyone from Moat is in the room, but they are our consultants. And I love that type of a relationship. On the video front, we just created a new unit that is so if you go to thescene.com, which is our video platform, we're testing different types of units that are always viewable. Right now then you get into this issue of player size. Well, the player size is smaller, so it's like you solve one and then you got another problem.
Whack-a-mole.
But it's great to have a partner that's saying, listen, if you're trying to solve for this, let's try and beta test these 3 experiences. And by the way, anybody that's using Moat, a la Group M, here's how it'll affect your score. So they're actually helping us, improve our efficiency as best we can. So it's an example of how I think it can work.
So I think from a testing perspective, that's an interesting approach. I mean, are you seeing, Eric, that happen within the retail environments? I mean, they do a lot of testing, trying to figure out the sales purchase funnel. Are they helping you in that arena?
Yeah, I mean, and Mode is one partner that we're working with. We haven't put a definitive line that they're it. We're working with IAS, we're working with ComScore. We're going through basically an audit on eBay. It's cascading to Walmart, it's cascading to our other partners like Toys R Us. And we had to make that choice initially because there's 17 accrediteds. We had to do that first RFI to figure out who could at least measure effectively within these tougher environments. That's when I learned what hostile iframes are. It's an enlightening moment in my career. But yeah, the dependency on them as consultants and strategic partners is definitely key because they're staying one step ahead, we hope, and they're giving us that insight, and we're able to translate that insight back to our retail partners, back to the buyers that are also trying to figure this out.
Yeah, I love that kind of setting the standard, benchmarking to that standard versus other partners that are being thrown at you. So at least you have that kind of one kind of line in the sand, if you will, that you are measuring against today and improving upon. I think that was one of the other things that Marcus mentioned in his talk. It's about how do you move the ball forward and make it incrementally better over time. It's not like you're going to go from 70 to 100 in a day. But given the fact that you are kind of at the center of the vortex, there's a lot of technology being thrown at you as a publisher or being required of you. I mean, over the top, you have to build to 17 different platforms, and then they're all different environments. Hostile iframes are another one, right? There's mobile. We've got, the video experience that we've got text publishers now kind of moving into, and, building apps, right? All of these things create real challenges for the publisher to manage from a technical perspective. To do viewability consistently across all of them seems like an impossibility.
I mean, think about this is what drives me crazy. All of these vendors, they're constantly iterating themselves, right? They make one change to an algorithm and we get, a panicked call from somebody in this room. Your scores are off the charts. What happened? So this is where we want to be good partners, but you got to give us a little bit of room here. I love this idea of benchmarking. Like anytime we're onboarding a new deal or a new business term, like we've got to benchmark this for a period of time, not because we want to be jerks about it, but literally, this happens at least 5 times a week. Oh, Double Verify changed their algorithm, so now Conde Nast is categorized as X. What? Go back, 10 calls, 3 hours. Okay, we fixed it. Oh, IAS changed their algorithm. Like, it's that makes us unfocused on the things you guys really want us to be focused on, which is not taking one piece of content and distributing it to 20 platforms, because it doesn't make sense on 20 platforms. You want us thinking with a consumer mindset that this works on Apple, this works on desktop, this is mobile first. But like, this gets us very distracted,
Well, I was going to say, I think to that point, just trying to get out of the reactionary mode. I mean, one thing that we're doing with the new site redesign is we're testing with I believe it's 3 out of the 5 video accredited vendors for viewability with regards to video, and it's something that we're going to share with the MRC once we complete the test, because again, we want to communicate to the buy community what is happening with regards to our video and how it's measuring up.
So in the final 30 seconds, it seems to me like partnership is really what this is about. In order to make viewability work, you need the buyer to come to the table, sit beside you at the table to actually figure it out and not bark orders. Is that what I'm hearing?
Always what it's about, Larry.
That's where it works.
Well, and the other part of the partnership is to, take a look behind the numbers. The example that I use all the time is we had 5 different viewability vendors come in, and we showed them, we ran a sticky banner on a test page in our dev environment, and they all came back with different viewability scores. There's only one. It's 100% viewable. So how could one be 47%? Yeah. Now, I know that. If I feel like the person on the other side of the desk knows that, then we can have a really good conversation and a partnership.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.